Brutal, violent, corrupt. Those are the words that clearly describe one of the most infamous members of the Gulf Cartel and a founding member of the Los Zetas. The mere mention of his name brought fear to the hearts of many and perks the ears of international law enforcement. Zeferino Peña Cuéllar, Don Zefe himself, is one of the most easily recognizable names in the illegal narcotics business. But how did this civil engineer become such a notorious crime lord? In this video, we'll take you through a story filled with violence and the struggle for money and power. This is the story of the elusive Don Zefe, the easy way to the top. Zeferino Peña Cuéllar was born in Tamaulipas, Mexico, to Israel Peña Barrera. Growing up, he realized quickly that he had to make a name for himself. Having come from a large family, the pressure was one to distinguish himself. He was smart and hardworking. After high school, he decided to study civil engineering. After graduating from university, though, he elected not to make a living with his engineering degree, choosing instead to go into the police force like his father, who had served from 1996 to 1998. He rose up in the ranks really fast, but his dutifulness on the job wasn't what got him to the top. You see, while serving, Zeferino became close friends with a colleague named Raul Rodriguez Barrera. They had met while Zeferino was an informant for the Federal Judicial Police, PJF, in Tamaulipas when Rodriguez Barrera was working there. Their friendship blossomed as the years went on. Eventually, Rodriguez became a mayor and then decided to reward his friend with a big promotion. And so, Zeferino became the chief of police of the Miguel Aleman Municipal Police Force, a position which he held from 1999 to 2001. From the outside looking in, it seemed like Zeferino Peña Cuéllar was living a pretty normal life, a thriving career, family, and even a healthy friendship with a handful of powerful politicians. But on closer inspection, you'd notice that he had a dark, sinister life, one where he wasn't Zeferino, the police chief, but instead Don Zefe, the executor, one where he commanded a league of assassins for one of Mexico's most notorious organized crime syndicates, corrupt beyond belief. While Don Zefe was on the clock as a police officer way before he even became chief of police, he wasn't serving just the state. You see, Zeferino was on the bankroll of the Gulf Cartel, a criminal group also based in Tamaulipas. They are one of the oldest Mexican cartels and are involved in just about every crime you can think of: drug trafficking, money laundering, extortion, kidnapping, human trafficking, people smuggling, robbery, murder, arms trafficking, bribery, fencing, counterfeiting. They did it all. The group is also known to be just like every other cartel, quite violent. Because of their proximity to the U.S., the Gulf Cartel was smuggling a ton of drugs and people through Texas into the United States illegally. They were, and still are, a very powerful criminal organization. The Gulf Cartel hasn't been able to run this long without employing the services of some state actors. Corrupt police officers have always been a big part of all successful cartels. For them, it simply makes more sense to pay police officers to either look the other way or even use them as enforcers and guards. This is where Don Zefe first came into the mix. He allegedly worked alongside organized crime kingpin Gilberto Garcia Mena and his lead smuggler Edelio Lopez Falcon, also popularly known as El Yayo. They were responsible for heading drug trafficking operations from Tamaulipas to the United States. They operated all throughout the state. Zeferino was originally Garcia Mena's financial operator, but soon he became more than just that. He became one of his main enforcers. King of negotiations. His duties as an enforcer included ensuring that drugs, money, and firearms moved freely in and out of Mexico for the cartel. He often also negotiated with rival cartels. He apparently was a very skilled negotiator and usually was able to make deals that benefited the parties involved. If negotiations proved difficult, however, he became someone else, a focused executor who would stop at nothing to quell and eliminate any form of dissent and rivalry. He was so essential to the cartel that eventually he was appointed as the head of the cartel's fraction in La Frontera Chica, especially the municipalities of Gustavo Díaz Ordaz, Camargo, Miguel Alemán, Mier, and Guerrero. He would also employ the use of mercenaries in the area to keep control. By using mercenaries, he managed to keep some form of distance from the violence that they perpetrated. The less directly involved he was, the less likely the Mexican government was to come for him. It simply made sense. Maintaining a militia of armed mercenaries wasn't cheap though, and Don Zefe and the Gulf Cartel spent a reasonable amount to keep them in their employ. Don Zefe also worked with the trafficker Fidel Hinojosa and with Ricardo Garza Manriquez, the former Miguel Alemán Public Security Department head. Support from locals. Don Zefe wasn't just a brutal enforcer and crime lord, though. To many people in the area he controlled, he was a philanthropist and a good man. Don Zefe had somehow managed to convince people that his work was in service of them. To them, without him, another criminal, one perhaps more violent than him, would simply take his place. He was basically the devil they knew and could trust. He donated to schools and other community projects. He also convinced them that he and his mercenaries were there to protect them against other rival groups who simply didn't care about them. This tactic worked really well for Don Zefe, and many people supported him. Eventually, the mercenaries in his control would become the Los Zetas, the Gulf Cartel's former paramilitary group that was originally composed of ex-commandos. Don Zefe remains one of the founding members of Los Zetas. Things started to change for Don Zefe and the Gulf Cartel after Rodriguez Barrera left office as mayor in 2001. In April 2001, the Mexican army carried out a massive manhunt in Guardados de Abajo Camargo that resulted in Garcia Mena's arrest. During one of the many raids that the army embarked on, one of Don Zefe's properties was raided. Multiple firearms were seized at his home, and authorities linked him to the Gulf Cartel. From that point on, he became a person of interest to the Mexican authorities, and federal agencies started to investigate him. Things got worse for him when word started to spread that he was responsible for giving info to the government, which led to the arrest of Garcia Mena. After this leaked, a manhunt for him started. A manhunt from the Gulf Cartel itself. From that point, Don Zefe knew that one of two things had to happen. He either had to disappear or he'd die. The perfect escape. On 30 October 2001, 14 gunmen dressed in military uniforms stormed an estate in the Hacienda Santa Lucia neighborhood in Monterrey with Hummers. This estate was owned by Don Zefe. Some gunmen entered the compound and reached the roof using ladders. Other gunmen destroyed the main entrance gate. Don Zefe's men took defensive positions and tried to repel the attack. There was a lot of gunfire. It was clear that the gunmen were here for business. They were here for Don Zefe. The one thing they didn't know, though, was that Zeferino had been alerted that there was going to be an attack on him and had fled the scene beforehand. Eventually, after over an hour of gunfire, Don's men surrendered, and some were taken away with the cars that the gunmen had come with. There were casualties and injuries as a result of the attack, though. As they were leaving, they were intercepted by a police officer who was responding to the sounds of gunfire at the estate. They told the police officer they were part of the military and were carrying out an operation there. Seeing as they were dressed in military attire and driving Hummers, which at the time was used exclusively by the military, the police officer believed them and let them go. However, after further investigation, it seemed less likely that it was the army, and more likely that it was the Gulf Cartel disguised as soldiers. Police officers later arrived at the scene and a full investigation was underway. They theorized that the attack was probably a reprisal for outing Garcia Mena, or an attack by Adelio Lopez Falcon, who had been accused of giving info that led to the arrest of Garcia Mena, allegedly by Don Zefe himself. Shortly after, Mexican federal authorities started to go after Don Zefe on allegations of murders and assassinations since 1999. The victims of his alleged attacks included Armando Melendez Sanchez, a political opponent of the mayor Rodriguez Barrera, Jaime Rajid Gutierrez Areola, who was a commander in the Federal Judicial Police, and Pablo Gaitan Mejia, the Miguel Alemán Rural Police Chief. He was also accused in 2002 of participating in the murder of the local journalist Felix Alonso Fernandez Garcia, a harsh critic of Mayor Rodriguez Barrera, his friend. That wasn't all, though. In 2005, Don Zefe was also alleged to have ordered the murder of Alejandro Dominguez Coelho, who was killed hours after becoming the Nuevo Laredo police chief, as was confirmed by members of Los Zetas who were being investigated. Investigators stated that Don Zefe murdered these people because they worked against his interests or because of drug or money settlements. Another perfect escape. With law enforcement hot on his tail, he realized that he couldn't remain in the country anymore and fled. The Mexican government, frustrated that they couldn't seem to hold Don Zefe, decided to go for the next best thing they could, his properties. The plan was to have him forfeit as much of his ill-gotten wealth as possible. However, Don Zefe had expected this and planned ahead. Most of his properties were not in his name, and his lawyers submitted injunction upon injunction in an attempt to frustrate the justice process. He and his lawyers maintained that he was a legitimate cattle rancher. This story was also backed by residents of Miguel Alemán. They claimed that if there was any illegal activity by Zeferino Peña Cuéllar, they were unaware of it. Peña Cuéllar disappeared from public view right after and has not been identified since then. He has left Mexico, and no one really knows where he is. There have been claims that he is hiding in Brazil, Canada, or Cuba, but none of these reports have actually brought anything solid. One report from a Los Zetas source actually claims that he has become a religious man and that he was trying to become the priest of a weird religion. The last that has been heard from Don Zefe was in 2018 when he and his siblings signed an edict to inherit assets owned by their father. In a move to avoid attention, he signed the edict using the name Zeferino instead of Zeferino. The Mexican government continues to search for him. It's highly unlikely that he'll return to Mexico anytime soon, but it remains to be seen.